Hello and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. And I've got another guest for you today, and this one is going to be very timely given what's going on with the news right now. But before we get into everything, before I bring him on, I just want to remind you to please like this video, share this video, and if you haven't already subscribed, you got to do that right now. All three of those things only take maybe like 5 seconds. So if you share, that'll help me a lot. Like this video, that helps me. And of course, you gotta subscribe. Show me some love. Also, remember that LibertyNation.com is a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. Check out LibertyNation.com for all of your conservatarian news, original articles, analysis, videos, podcasts, Liberty Nation Radio, and their signature TV program, The Conservative Five. All on LibertyNation.com, conservative news where truth matters. Now, if you've been paying attention to the news, or at least to my Twitter feed, you've probably heard of the Amir Locke case. A case, just to make it short, where a black man was killed in an apartment building. He was holding his pistol, which he owned legally, but it was during a no-knock raid, and they happened to get the wrong person. So that's obviously ignited a lot of controversy, and it's also ignited yet another discussion on no-knock raids, whether we should rethink those or redo those or do away with them altogether. Just like in the case of Breonna Taylor, we saw the debate, and I'd been wanting to speak with people who actually know about this issue. So without further ado, I want to bring on Mr. Todd McComas. He is a retired police detective, 21 years, I believe. He's also somehow a comedian and the host of a true crime podcast called 1041. Welcome to the show, Todd. How you doing?
Hey, Jeff. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad that you reached out to me because you're the exact type of person that I want to talk to. But before we get into the serious stuff, I need to know something. How the hell do you go from being a detective to a comedian? Now, the host of a true crime podcast, I get that. That makes sense. But a comedian, I need to know how that came about.
Yeah, it's kind of come full circle for me now that I'm in true crime. But, for a long time, I didn't want to talk about crime or police work or any of that stuff. I just, I'd done it for so long. I just want to set it aside and start something new. I had been doing comedy for like the last 7-8 years of my police career. I just got talked into doing an open mic one night and fell in love with it, couldn't put it down. And I'm kind of an obsessive personality. So when I'm not good at something, I have to kill myself in order to get good at it. And before I knew it, I was kind of past my peers and people were wanting to pay me to do comedy and travel and all that stuff. So I got an opportunity to take a radio and podcasting job with Barstool Sports for the Pat McAfee show. Pat McAfee was a friend of mine. He had played for the Colts, was now going into that world of comedy sports. And I was like, sure, yeah. I almost got shot like 4 weeks ago. For sure, I'll go do that. And so I took that job, and the rest is kind of history. I was in this comedy world, and then it kept growing more and more sports. I like sports, but I don't want to live it, but you got to live it to do that job.
Right.
And I went on my own, just doing stand-up. And before you knew it, COVID hit, kind of took a bite out of stand-up comedy and travel. So I found myself just going back to what I know and podcasting about crime and talking to old cops and people that had been on the other side of it, former criminals and whatnot. That's what I do on 1041 now. And, I'm just kind of rediscovered my passion for it with the new me because I have a new point of view now that I've been separated from the cop world for a few years.
Really? Now, tell me about that. What do you mean? How is your view different now than it was from what it was then?
Well, I think it's like any job that actually is also a lifestyle, I will say, right? Where you're really just submersed in that culture, in that world.
Right.
When you're in law enforcement, there is a real kind of an us versus them mentality. Right?
Okay.
As far as those who break the law and those who are responsible for holding people who break the law accountable. So you're really you're more like only seeing things from a police administration view.
Hmm.
And now I will say I was a little different than most because I worked undercover for so long. So
Okay.
in that role, you really get to know crime and the people who commit them intimately because you're hanging out with them. Now it's all a
Mm.
ruse, but when you do so, you're like, in another world, if we had different roles, we would be friends. Like this is a real
Mm.
person.
You see their
And
humanity.
yes. And I also, I had a lot of family members that, in and out of prison, things like that.
Hmm.
So I did have a little bit different perspective even before I left. But after I left and I became a regular, just contributing person to society who doesn't wear a badge or a gun and doesn't carry those responsibilities and isn't seeing crime and evil and pain and suffering constantly in my face, I
Hmm.
began, I think, to adopt a more regular person's view. So I find myself way more in the middle on police issues like the one you want to talk about today than I might have been before.
That's interesting. So it's like, when you're in that environment, you feel a certain way, but then when you're out of it for a few years, it makes sense that your viewpoint would change. It's interesting because I've been doing a bunch of interviews this week, and it just feels like the word environment keeps coming up. And it can relate to a lot of different things. And it's just, I think we underestimate how much of an influence environment is in our lives and on our psyche and the way we think.
Absolutely, because like for instance, when you look at crime causation, if you grow up, I have a friend. He was a member of the Philadelphia Mafia back in the
Mhm.
day, and they put a hit on him. He ended up flipping for the FBI, and it's weird
Mm.
to hear me say he's a friend. He was a hitman, but he went through witness protection. He's come out the other side. He is a different person, and where he grew up, he had two options in life: to become a professional boxer or
Mhm.
to join the mafia. And he went the mafia route. Now, it was strictly because I know him now as a guy who drives a church bus and has a
Wow.
successful business and brings things once a week. He volunteers at a senior center. Like that's the guy I know now. So it's hard to believe he was in that world. So that when you look at somebody like that all along, you're like, this person only acted within the options that were handed to him. He was a
Mhm.
good person. It's just he went into this life of crime and murder and hits and whatever else comes with that because where he grew up, if you wanted to have anything in this world and you didn't want to die on the street at 15, you had to join a team, and
Mm.
that was his team.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? Like,
It
I
does.
think
That makes
we
perfect
all are
sense.
a product of our environment, and your views of the world are totally shaped by where your feet are.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's got me thinking. I mean, it's like because we all are subject to this. I mean, and
Yeah.
whether it involves criminality or not, our environment shapes the way we think. And it's like it just showed me how limited we are
Yeah.
if we're not able to get out of our environment. And that
Yeah.
can go from anybody. I mean, I talked to a guy named King Randall. He mentors kids in Albany, Georgia. They come up in a certain type of environment, and the problem is that when you're talking about like inner city type of issues with black and brown children or whatever color children, when you get them out of that environment, they do well. But if you don't keep them out of that environment and you put them back in, they go right back to what they're used to. It takes almost a total dramatic change sustained over time for people to see outside of what they were raised in. And it sounds like that's kind of what happened with you. I mean, you retired, you got
Yes.
into comedy, you did that for years and years, and then you found yourself along the way saying, okay, maybe I don't agree with everything that was there. Maybe now my worldview has expanded.
Totally. I always say the best advisors, especially given the current climate right now, the
Right.
best advisors for police departments in shaping a new vision for police are kind of people like myself, not to be exclusively on that committee, but to be
Right.
members of that committee. Someone who was in law enforcement, who had a diverse background, did a lot of different things, and then now is 4 or 5 years removed as a civilian because you do think differently. But yet, you can balance out the rest of the committee by knowing what it is to do that job, what it takes to do that job, and what you go through every day.
Would you say that a lot of officers who retire kind of go through the same journey, or do you think you're more unique in that regard, or would you say this is like a common thing, like you retire from the force, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 years later you have a different viewpoint on things? Is that common?
It happens to them on some level. I would say every one of them on some level. I will say I'm a little bit unique because of the things I've done since, I've been in entertainment. Now, entertainment's very liberal, right?
Yes.
The industry, very much so. And you learn, as you grow friendships with people from a different point of view and a different walk of life, and you actually develop love for those people. It even more so affects the way you think. So I would say I experienced it on a more drastic or powerful level than a lot do, but definitely no matter how hardcore or militaristic their mindset was when they left, it gets softened somewhat after they leave.
Mm-hmm. It kind of has to. I mean, because they're not living in that world anymore. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Oh, yeah. See, that could be its own episode there. So I have a feeling like we're going to need to have a few of these conversations because I really want to learn more about this. Yeah. So let's go ahead and talk about the issue. I mean, because I know I tweeted out that I wanted to talk to actual law enforcement professionals about this issue. Now, before we get into Amir Locke, what can you tell us about the history of no-knock raids if you're versed in that?
Yeah, well, I can't tell you what year exactly they started, but basically you can track it back its roots to the war on crime, when that was declared through the Reagan era, I believe. It was a way for police to more safely enter a dangerous environment where they thought before that, and this was the thought before, was that the person on the other end of that warrant service has an advantage as a criminal if you knock and announce that you're on the other side of that door. They can get rid of evidence. They can destroy drugs that they have there, money, whatever, that would be evidence to the crime at hand. And they could arm themselves and barricade and prepare to go into a gunfight with police. That was the heart of it back then. Now, with anything, things like that get taken advantage of.
Sure.
And that's what I saw a lot in my career. Now, I didn't realize it at the time. At the time, I thought, well, this is a great tool. I was a narcotics detective, so we did warrants every day. We did search warrants every day. And we would kick a lot of doors. And at that time, during the peak of all that, especially during the meth lab craze, when that was hot and heavy, we would get these no-knock warrants, and then the only thing you had to do was have a savvy prosecutor to do an oral probable cause hearing for your search warrant with a judge over a phone if it was in the middle of the night or whatever. And the prosecutor would just guide you into basically saying that in your training and experience that drug dealers a lot of times have weapons.
Right.
And that drugs are easily destroyed. And if you met those two elements, a judge would give you a no-knock warrant. Now, that is not the original intention, I don't believe, for the no-knock warrant.
So, I want to know more about that because one of my other questions, the next one I was going to ask, I'm always told that to get a no-knock warrant, the bar is very high and it's very hard to do. And I'm sure it's different for different states, different municipalities. But what you just said just kind of blew that out of the water. I mean, it sounds like it's not as hard as as I have been led to believe.
Not in my experience. Now, I'm in Indiana, very Midwest. It's the heart of the Midwest. So it's a little more, I guess, easier in that regard, a little more conservative than other areas. There are states now where you can't get a no-knock warrant. And I think there are 13 states where you can as long as you ask, maybe somewhere around that. And then there are the states in between, which Indiana happens to be one. It's not an automatic. You have to defend it through a probable cause hearing of some sort with a judge, and then the judge can use his or her discretion to award you an exception to the knock and announce rule. And but it was so easy. Maybe I've been gone since 2017. Maybe it's softened here a little bit, or it's getting more difficult here. But I don't think that's the case. And it does depend where you are, obviously. And in my opinion, there are no absolutes. I don't think you can ever say you can never ever get a no-knock warrant, right? I just think it should be incredibly difficult to do. And I'll give you a comparison. Wiretaps. I did a lot of wiretaps in my day for the feds or state level. And it's very difficult. Like, I think people think it's very easy. That is very, very difficult to get a warrant to intercept someone's electronic communications. I mean, you're writing a novel. I mean, these affidavits are 50, 60 pages deep sometimes.
Really?
Yeah, because the heart of that is the ability to do that. The heart behind it was that this is very, very invasive, and this must be a last resort to accomplish what you need to, and under only certain circumstances and laws. So if you were to do it on a drug case, you would have to demonstrate to a judge that you tried every other traditional investigative mean available: surveillance, hand-to-hand buys with undercovers, use of informants, all these things, but still could not get to the next level in the chain, to that source of the drugs. So
it's very interesting to me that the bar is that high just to wiretap somebody, which is arguably that's not a threat on their life if you're just listening in on what they're doing. And the bar should be high. I'm not saying that it should be. It should be very high. But it's interesting to me that it's so high in that regard. But when it comes to a situation where you're going to knock somebody's door down and potentially get into a situation where the officer can get killed and the other person can get killed, or an innocent bystander could be killed, and that in your experience, and I'm sure in a lot of other people's experience, it's not as hard to get that warrant.
No, it's too easy. It should be more difficult, like you said. That's why I give that example, than getting a wiretap, because it's such a dangerous situation. I would say, here's an example where I think anyone, anywhere should be able to get one. Let's say you're already proved that there is a man who's keeping a family locked up in his basement.
Right.
And he has already told police on the phone, if anyone comes near my house, I'm going to kill everybody in this basement. I've got it rigged to where the whole basement catches fire, and I will push that button. Well, then you don't want to knock and say, I know you made that threat, but we're outside. Right. We need you to, you may have to secretly enter that house and then put an end to his ability to push that button, right? So that's an instance. That's why I say you can't ever say it in an absolute, that you can't do this no matter what. But most of the time I'm against these. And it's going to be hard for some of my peers to hear, that are still on the job. But I'm against them from my own experiences. And run me through, if you don't mind, what you know in the Locke case, because I'm somewhat familiar, but I didn't verse up before we get on here.
Okay, I'll give you the rundown, and also for the people who are watching this who don't know. So here's how it came about. So this happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The St. Paul Police Department was conducting a homicide investigation. And there were actually 3 different sites that they wanted to go into to find whoever they were looking for. I don't know much detail about the actual homicide case. I'm not sure if they've even released those details. So the St. Paul Police Department wanted to search this apartment. They went and got a warrant from a judge, but it was a knock warrant. And then I guess the St. Paul Police Department collaborates with the Minneapolis Police Department on a routine basis to apprehend people or whatever they do. So they went to the Minneapolis Police Department and said, hey, we've got this warrant. Can you go ahead and serve this and pick this guy up? And Minneapolis Police Department said, we're not going to do that unless we also have a no-knock warrant. So they wanted both, so that the officers, when they got there, they can decide which one they wanted to execute. So St. Paul goes back to the judge and also gets a no-knock warrant, and then says, okay, here you go. And then at about 6:30 in the morning, 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, I believe it was not last Wednesday. Well, yeah, it was last Wednesday, actually, because the body cam footage was released on last Friday. Okay. So officers show up and they unlock the door. And this is what the body cam footage shows. They unlock the door and they go in the house, probably about 4 or 5 officers. And when they start walking, when they get past the threshold, when they go into the door, then they start yelling, "Police, police." One of them runs up to a couch where Amir Locke was sleeping. He was completely covered by a blanket, but he was laying on a couch. He was asleep. And they started yelling and yelling. One of them kicked the couch, and then he kind of gets up. He pulls the blanket off, and he has a pistol in his hand. His finger was not on the trigger, and he wasn't really holding it as in pointing it, but obviously one of the officers saw the gun, and he shot Amir Locke 3 times, 2 in the chest, 1 in his right wrist. He later died at the hospital. It later came out that he had no criminal record. He had a license to carry that firearm. He was staying at his cousin's apartment. Now, it's not yet clear to me. I've been hearing that they probably had the wrong apartment, but I also saw news reports that they believe the actual occupant of that apartment had a tussle with police before. He had been arrested for resisting arrest. I don't know if because it was his cousin's apartment. I don't know if his cousin was a homicide suspect or not. I don't have all those details yet. But all I know is that Amir Locke was visiting his cousin, and that's why he was in the apartment asleep. And then, but here's the other thing with this case, Todd. After George Floyd happened, the city of Minneapolis, the mayor, Jacob Frey, he issued a rule saying that if you conduct a no-knock warrant, the police department has to announce their presence and announce the purpose for why they're there. So they don't knock, but they have to at least yell it out and declare, "Hey, police," whatever. And the chief of police, when she did a press conference before the body cam footage was released, she said that the officers did that. But when you watch the body cam footage, you see they didn't say anything until after they opened that door, until after they were already in the apartment. So Amir Locke would have been woken up by that. And like a lot of Second Amendment people, like a lot of gun owners, it's not clear whether he had the gun in his hand when he was asleep or if it was just near him and he picked it up. I would imagine that he just picked it up because a lot of gun owners, they keep their guns on their nightstands, locked and loaded with one in the chamber, all that stuff. But when he woke up, obviously he would have been disoriented. He didn't know what was going on. And it's an unfortunate situation, but he had the gun, so they shot him. So that's basically what happened.
Well, I have 2 things, right? So let's start with the right to defend yourself. That's something that's, we all have that constitutional right to protect ourselves, especially in our own home or where we are staying. And in many states, you can carry a firearm publicly anywhere that you go, but in every state, you're allowed to keep one where you're staying or in your home, right? So we know that from the other side. Law enforcement knows that. A lot of people have guns and they have the right to protect themselves. So when you go in with a no-knock warrant, and let's say you're in a part of your city that doesn't even experience a lot of crime, like for some reason, the person there is a doctor for some reason or whatever, and has never seen violence or crime, but you hit the wrong house and you scare that doctor, but he has a gun on his nightstand and he jumps up and he uses it. He's not even totally awake yet. Then there's that issue, right? This is honestly now a person who's just defending themselves in their own home, who has no connection to what law enforcement thinks they're there to do. Now, in In a different instance, let's say you are actually a criminal. You're someone who commits crimes all the time,
Hmm.
and you live in an area that police hit doors a lot, and there's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of people get robbed or whatever. When police come through that door and they don't knock ahead of time, have to show their credentials before you let them in or any of that stuff. You just, under that rule there in Minneapolis, where you just kick the door and then it's okay as long as you say, we're the police, we're the police.
Right.
Let's think about what we know about home invasion robbery crews. Home invasion robbery crews rob drug dealers, they rob people, anyone that they know has a stash of cash in their house.
Hmm.
And their number one method for getting that done is to pretend to be the police, throwing on a
Hmm.
police jacket, a fake badge around your neck, just like what, drug detectives look like when they hit a house. And once they're in there, they not only rob you, they many times kill you. They leave no witnesses, these robbery crews. So if you're a person who's savvy to that, then you don't automatically feel better just because after your door got shattered into four pieces, you heard that person say, I'm the police,
Hmm.
right? So
Anybody can say that.
anybody can say that. And you probably have been affected by that in your community at some point, or known someone on the other end of that, or you know
Right.
somebody who does that, one or the other. And it doesn't matter to me whether or not you're a person who's actively committing crime or has how I don't care how you got savvy. You're a human being and you're in your own home. You
Hmm.
have the same rights as everybody else. So let's put that aside. I just gave it an example because that's somebody who knows what people who do home invasion robberies do.
Yeah.
So that's not a good rule. That doesn't make it better. Just yelling that you're the police
Hmm.
after you shatter a door. So another thing is being at the wrong place. Like that maybe they were at the right place, but there was a different person there. But sometimes these warrants, when you execute a warrant, many times, I was on a team that at the end of my career, we were a fugitive task force. So if
Okay.
you couldn't find this fugitive and they qualified as it was a violent crime that they were wanted for, our team would find them for you, and we would do that by tracking their cell phone. And
Okay.
we would show up to where they were, and then we would kick the door, or you would give us a search warrant because you already knew where they were, and we would verify that with the phone, and then we would go in and kick the door and serve the warrant. And many of those were no knocks because just here in Indiana, it was easy to get it if that person was wanted for murder or armed
Hmm.
robbery, these things. Well, this one particular case that we did, we went to a trailer court, and there was allegedly a young woman being held captive by a man that lived at that trailer. They had had a relationship at one point. This is the information we were given.
Right.
This is where he lives. There's a no-knock warrant to go in there. Though the young girl, is a daughter of a judge in this state, and there was telephone communication, a message sent. This is what we were told from that man to the wife, the judge's wife, that said,
Okay.
You're going to give me this much money if you don't deliver it by this date and time. When I give you instructions of where to do so, I'm going to kill your daughter.
Wow.
So we're thinking this is a big deal, right?
Right.
And the no
Yeah.
knock warrant makes sense to us now. We don't want her harmed. We watched the place. We tried to wait to a moment to where he was in a different part of the house than where she was, and
Hmm.
boom, we kicked that door and put ourselves between he and her. So we planned
Right.
it well and all that, but we get in there and the guy takes off and he runs and he goes to grab something, and one of my partners tased him. Thank God didn't
Okay.
shoot him, tased him. And he went to the floor, and we were able to control him before he could get to whatever he was going to. Now, I didn't find a gun or anything there, so whatever he was going to was not, I don't think, a weapon to hurt us. There was a
Okay.
phone nearby, whatever. So we were thinking, oh, we're heroes for the day. We just saved this girl. She might have died if it wasn't for us and all this. Come to find out after the fact, detectives working the case were able to discover and prove that The judge's wife just did not approve of this relationship. So she went and bought a burner phone
Oh,
at
come
Walmart
on.
and texted herself as if it were the boyfriend doing it. Made the whole thing up. Now, can you imagine if my partner would have
I
shot
shot him.
this young man and killed
Oh my
him over
gosh.
something totally made up? So, in an instance where you would think, you might even defend a no-knock warrant under these circumstances, but
Yeah.
we were there because of fictitious circumstances, malignant, fictitious circumstances. A
See,
judge's wife using the law to her advantage just to, I don't like my husband's boyfriend. Go in there and lock him up and put him away for kidnapping. Wow. Wow. And he not even thinking probably, well, he might get killed or one of
right.
us might get killed, you know?
Right. I mean, there's just so much that could have gone wrong there. I mean, there's better ways to get rid of your daughter's boyfriend. I mean, come on.
Absolutely.
See, but
Absolutely.
that even makes me think because I mean, I stand kind of where you stand. Like the only reason a no-knock warrant should be justified is if there's an imminent danger to somebody. But then I
Yeah.
hear that story and I'm like,
Yeah. It's almost that case right there was almost the example that should be used for people that don't want them to exist at all under no circumstances, right?
yeah,
Because
'cause I've seen people say that online, and I'm like, and even with your story, I mean, I'm sure that, I mean, I hope that that's not common, but still,
I wouldn't think so, but still, it happened once in my career in 21 years. I'm sure it's happened at other places. And I know for a fact during my time, I have seen a few drug warrants where doors were kicked and the detective that gave them the information to get the warrant had the address wrong, either numerically made a mistake, a typo, or was
mhm,
sent by another detective like, hey, go get me the fit. Because when you apply for a warrant, somebody has to go put eyes on it and give a physical description, not only just the address. It's like an extra level of protection, right, to make sure you got the right place. It's
right,
a one-story brick ranch home with the numerics 1, 2, 3, 4 on the front above the garage door and all these things. But this person was sent by a detective and just said, "Hey, it's over here. I get the address for me and get the physical description." And the guy get the house next door by mistake, and that's
mm,
the door that got kicked. I mean, I've seen that happen more than once, a few times. So someone could have got hurt in those as well.
wow, okay, so yeah, I definitely want to dig into this, and I want to dig into some other aspects of no-knock warrants and the things outside of that. But before we go in deeper into that, just don't forget to head on over to libertynation.com, a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, where you can sign up for the daily briefing. You can uh, get a lot of different viewpoints from the right. I mean, we've got something for everybody if you're on the right. If we've got traditional conservative writers, we've got conservatarians like myself, libertarians, anarcho capitalists, anything you want. So at libertynation.com, you're going to get all of the news, you're going to get think pieces, you're going to get all kinds of content, but without the usual spin that just regurgitates all the normal talking points that don't really make you think or don't really teach you anything. So remember to check out libertynation.com, the latest cutting edge conservative news and analysis, always new and original material with a giant helping of nuance at libertynation.com. Okay, so when it comes to warrants in general, in your career, would you say that you did more no knock warrants or more knock warrants or about
More
the same?
knock, more knock warrants for sure. But
Mhm.
it was enough no knock warrants. I couldn't even put a number on it. I mean, I was a
Mhm.
drug detective for a long time, and out of 21 years as a cop, I was a detective of one kind or another for 19 and a half of that. So I hit a lot of warrants. So percentage wise, I don't even know. Maybe 20% of them, 15% were no knocks, but that's
Mhm.
high considering I've done
20
thousands
years.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what about the officer? I mean, have you heard? I mean, I'm sure you've heard of situations where it's gone wrong for an officer, or maybe you've even seen it happen. I mean, we always talk about the victim, which is important, but I mean, it seems to me that these are dangerous for police officers as well.
They are. And I was going to add, if we make it, let's say we get to a point where we make it just very, very difficult to get, but theoretically it can be achieved under the most grave circumstances and most urgent circumstances, then I think it should only be served by people specifically trained to do so. SWAT teams, whatever.
Okay.
And reason being, even though I'd hit countless doors in my day and I did have a little bit of specialized, room entry training and whatnot, I was not a SWAT person. And those people train full time of when to shoot and when not to shoot. They are so much better, even though they make mistakes as well, but they are so much better than your average detective or officer at making those decisions. They train under stressful conditions. They're used to entering rooms with an elevated heart rate and those things, where your average officer, when they hit that door, a lot of times their adrenaline's through the roof, and that affects decision making. When you're scared, you make poor decisions, and I don't know if that's what happened in the Locke case or not, but many times when I watch these videos and I see a police officer who's not just a horrible person trying to hurt somebody, we see that too, but when we see the officer who makes a mistake, it's in my experience in watching them, 100% of the time is because that officer is scared to a level that they're no longer thinking and they're no longer processing and planning and analyzing. It's just pure animal instinct, and animals, not the best decision makers. They're like, if that dog says, "Oh, I think that dog is a threat, I'm going to bite it," Well, we're supposed to be above that, and it all has to do with training to a level where you're able to control what happens chemically to your body under those circumstances, where you can still think, you can keep your heart rate down enough to where you can process what's happening and make intelligent decisions.
Right. Yeah. See, and I don't think those officers was. I'm actually pretty sure they weren't SWAT. They were.
I'm sure they were.
They had all the armor and stuff, but they weren't. Yeah. They weren't SWAT. Well, so then that's a question. With no-knock warrants, why didn't they just set it up to where it's only SWAT that can execute those?
Yeah, I think it would be a good policy, right? I mean, and you specifically address other things, which, good SWAT teams do. I mean, good SWAT teams, I think they get a bad rap because they look like ninjas and they look like Navy SEALs and Delta Force, and they're like, why do we have that in police? And I get it. I agree with that on some level, but also if things really, really go bad, and we need a team like that, it's good that they're there. And they do spend a lot of time on shoot, don't shoot, and putting themselves in training positions. They're creative with it, where it is the wrong house. I know the SWAT team where I worked, they had a training scenario in their qualifying school for candidates, and one of them was, you do hit the wrong house. And a guy does have a gun. And I've been a role player before where I have the gun, and I'm like, because they would use undercovers as role players. So I would reach for it, and be like, what are you doing in my house? And do you shoot me or not? I don't point it at you. I just grab it and I hold it up, similar to the Locke situation. Yeah. Do you shoot me or not? And so when you train to prepare for the worst, you're more apt to be able to handle that worst case scenario better. But your average officer who's just throwing on a raid vest to kick that door, who doesn't do that for a living, then what's going to happen when I say, what are you doing in my house? And I grab that gun and hold it next to my waist. You're probably way more apt to make a mistake.
Yeah. So here's a question, because we're talking about the cons of no-knock raids. Just to be fair, what are some of the pros of having no-knock raids?
I think it's only one pro, and it's got to be that one situation, kind of like, it sounds crazy, a family in my basement locked up, and I got a fire button here that I can hit and incinerate them, and something like that. I mean, literally, where you've been able to put yourself as police, put eyes on what's happening. There's been some level of communication to where there's just no doubt there is a person inside who's going to die if you don't go in there and stop it from happening, or at least try. You have to exhaust any kind of negotiation that can be done. things like that, you know. And I've seen that here. Okay, here's a good example. I've seen this myself. This one day I was coming. I used to be on the dive team, so I was coming back from a training dive, and you know, I just had on I think I still had swim trunks on because I'd been diving, and just a t-shirt. It was hot and a ball cap on, and I'm driving down the interstate. I'm almost home, and there's a gas station right off the interstate there in my hometown, and I see a bunch of police cars all over in the parking lot, lights on and stuff. And I was like, oh, let me see what's going on there. I turn on my radio. I can hear something cool's happening, in my opinion. So I pull off, and I just start walking up, and there's guys behind cars, and they're like, get out, get out, get out. And I'm like, okay. So they're like, what's going on? There's a guy in there shooting at us. He was robbing the gas station, and now he's got some hostages in there.
Oh,
and I'm
okay.
like, oh, okay. And I see the glasses busted out where the guy had been shooting out. So it turns into a whole day and a half long barricade situation where he lets every hostage out except one, this young woman. And I was part of the negotiation process. So I was not a negotiator, but I was assigned to help the negotiator. So I sat in the command bus. That's how much time we were out there. A whole command bus came. Hostage negotiators talking to this guy throughout the whole course of this incident. And I can hear it too. So I'm making notes, right? It's my job to make notes. If he says something important, whatever, and try to get a hold of someone, learn more about him. So I'm making calls to other people in his life and whatnot. And it clearly reaches a point where this guy is not coming out, and he's not releasing her. And he makes a statement to the effect of, you know, if you come in here, it's going to be bad for her. And this has gone on a long time, and this guy hadn't gotten any sleep. It reached a point where I think command staff made a good decision, was this is going to end badly for her if we don't try to stop it. So they assembled two different SWAT teams, our state police SWAT team and then the city SWAT team from Indianapolis, because they had specialized training in explosives, water explosive breaches. Basically, a real cool thing where they put these little water bags in between the door and the little explosive device, and it's like a safe way to blow a door inward. So
how many people would you say that is? How many officers? Like if it's two squads, how many officers would that be?
I'm going to say there was 20 SWAT members from two different teams involved in this entry. Yeah. So, and that's including like snipers that could see in and all that stuff. So they have what they decided to do was a distraction where they blew the back door. And they could see this guy had positioned himself when he kind of could see something was about to happen. There was no way to hide it because it's an open glass front. It's a gas station. So he conceals – he starts moving out 2-liter bottles from the cooler, and just this glass door cooler. And we're like, oh, this is weird. What happened was then he pulled her in there. So he created a space within the 2-liter pop bottles for he and this woman to hunker down in. And boom, they blew the back door, and then boom, kicked in the front door. Our team was in the front, and they didn't warn him. This was all like, I'm going to create a distraction, but then we're coming in through the front. And the guy turned to kill. When he was killed, he was turning his gun right at this woman as if murder-suicide real quick. And they were able, they shot him and killed him, but before he could pull the trigger and hurt the girl. Now, in my experience, that's one time that I can. All right, I have two from my career where no knocks were necessary. That was one. The other was a kidnapping situation where we actually got in there, and there was this woman was duct taped up in the bathroom, and there was a guy on just outside of the door with a gun, who admitted later was told, if this kidnapping ransom isn't arranged by this time, I am supposed to kill her. And he was going to. I mean, he admitted it. So 2 times in 21 years where I can tell you for sure that a no-knock was necessary.
So just out of the thousands you've done, only 2 you actually thought were necessary.
2. Drugs, who cares if they flush the drugs? Now,
yeah,
I wouldn't have told you that then. I'd have been like, oh, no, we got to get the drug dealer. But that drug dealer's not going to go out and hurt nobody if, he's not the cartel. He's going to flush some drugs. You're getting next time.
Yeah, you get a
whatever.
mix. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, and you already answered it, but I was going to say, do you think that there's ever any pros to doing this when it comes to drugs or stuff like that?
Never.
I don't see any, but yeah. So then let me ask you this, because here's the counter. If you get rid of no-knock warrants, then how do you apprehend these people? Let's say it's a murder suspect. Maybe there's not an imminent danger, but this guy's wanted for murder. How are you going to get him if you don't do a no-knock warrant?
Well, here's my thing, and I see this happen a lot where police just get impatient, right? So I've been out at several of these before where I'm like, my point of view will be, well, we have the ability to order pizza. We can stay out here forever. You can relieve me and I can go pee and poop somewhere. Like he's hunkered down in here. Eventually you turn his water off and the electric off. He's going to want to come out. Like, where is he going to go? He can't hurt anybody. He's in there by himself. Wait him out. And I've always been a fan of that. Like, why risk us getting hurt or anybody else, or having to kill him
forever? He's got to come out. He's got to come out.
But the police mentality a lot of times is, well, we're not sitting out here for 2 days. Well, why not? If these 6 guys aren't writing tickets for 2 days, who cares? They can do this instead of writing tickets. So I think that most times, even if it's a murderer, wanted for a murder, he's in there. If he's not putting anyone in danger at that moment and he's contained within 4 walls, you just wait until he does surrender. And eventually, if it comes down to you're 2 days in and he's not going to surrender and you've got to make a decision, well, then you discuss things then, but I can't imagine that 4 hours into it, getting a no-knock warrant and causing a gun battle is doing anybody any good.
Here's another question then. What about? I mean, why wouldn't, instead of doing a no-knock warrant, why not just? Let's say he doesn't even know you're about to arrest him. Why not just wait until he goes out to go to his car, or when he goes to work, or just wait until he leaves the house and then grab him? Like, why would they just not do that? Because especially if he doesn't know that he's about to be arrested, he's gonna leave the house.
Sure.
Why not just grab him then?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good thought. I mean, and I would say I've been part of scenarios where we did that. Where as undercovers we would do surveillance, and it was our job to call off. Okay, he's walking to his truck.
Right.
And then boom.
I will the movies all the time.
Right. I will say, there is the argument of once you let them step into the public, now you put the public at risk. There is that happens. I was in a shootout where that happened, but we couldn't get a warrant. We didn't know which apartment he was in the building, but he had gotten away from us at one point, and then we could track phones. So we come in and we're like, he's in here somewhere, but we don't know which apartment yet. And we just surrounded it and waited for him to walk out. And when he did, he was, we're going to shoot it out. I'm not going. You're going to have to kill me, which was what happened. And but he had made his mind up. He had been in prison for a long time. He'd been out for a little bit, and he'd already told all his friends. You find out afterward, no, I won't go back. They're going to have to kill me. And he made it that way. And it put a lot of people, I almost got shot. A buddy of mine almost got shot. And, luckily no civilians popped up to be taken captive or used as a shield or anything. But
right.
He did get shot in somebody's backyard. He was trying to get into their house. So, there is that element of now we can't contain things as well.
You can't control it as well.
Yeah. Now, I'm not going to say, proper planning, defeats piss poor performance a lot of times. I'm not saying we planned for that the best. That was very much like an in the moment off the cuff thing. If you knew this guy is been staying at this house and you have time to prepare and properly set things up, then I would say yes, you nailed it. That's probably going to be the best way to get him. You let him, step in his car, crank it up, and then pull a van behind him and put it right on his bumper where he can't go anywhere, and then let's surround him.
Yeah, then fewer people are in danger. I mean, the officers are still in danger. I acknowledge that. But I mean, if you have enough officers there, then you lower the likelihood that somebody's going to get hurt when you take this guy in, or
Mhm.
the only one who gets hurt is him. So
Yes. And
yeah,
there isn't someone else in that house or that apartment that could
exactly.
get hurt accidentally, or that it's his cousin there, not him. We can physically see him because he came outside, which is what we ran into in the Locke case, right?
Yeah,
So
and
there are
that,
many advantages to that.
yeah, and that's what I was thinking. I was like, okay, you think the guy in this apartment might be involved in a homicide or might know something or whatever. You can just wait until he comes out or handle it different. It seems like there are so many different ways that they just rely on this. They're just so dogmatic about this. Like if I were to ask an officer who's on duty right now why he prefers no knock raids, what would he tell me?
He's probably going to tell you that, or she, that it's safer for them. That's it.
Mm,
Probably going to say it's safer for me, and that person can't destroy any evidence that I might need to put the case on them. Now, they're not thinking it through. It's really not safer for you. It's way more dangerous, actually. I mean, listen, no matter what, even if this person is a person who wants to shoot it out with us, no matter what, if I knock on the door and I have 6, 7 other people with me, and I say, police, open the door, and they don't. Now I am allowed to kick that door, but I already know by the fact that they're refusing to open the door that this is confrontational. This
yeah,
person is
they've
not
already
surrendering.
escalated. Yeah.
Now I can step back, and all I got to do is call the station and say, oh, you know what? They're not opening the door. And they're just give us a big F you. Why don't we bring in a SWAT team? Let's just let them
Mm-hmm.
stay in there. To me, and I'm going to tell them to the other door, you know what? Cool. We're just going to consider this a barricaded situation. I'm going to call some experts. Don't try to go anywhere. We're all around you. We'll be back. And,
Mm.
and then let
And
them
that
know.
might even work. He might say, nope, I don't feel like going through all that.
Yeah, he might say, okay. I don't want a dog coming in here or a SWAT team, so I'm going to open the door. And then now you can say, yeah, but you're going to open it under my terms. I'm going to tell you how to open this door as carefully as possible so that you don't get hurt and we don't get hurt. And I think, a lot of times that communication, the best tool an officer has is not hanging from their gun belt. It's their brain and their ability to communicate. That's the best weapon any cop has. And you can de-escalate things so quickly with just a little bit of savvy and a little bit of patience. 99% of the time.
Wow. Wow. So when we're having this conversation, and even just the overall conversation about policing in America, and we're talking about police reform, and here's where I'll throw the racial element in it, because Black people especially don't want to defund the police or to get rid of police. I mean, that Gallup poll that came out in late 2020 showed that 81% of Black Americans want the same level of police activity in their communities or more. So what we're talking about here, we want police reform, not fewer police. Most Black people are not anti-police because in certain neighborhoods, you got to they need them more.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular issue here is part of police reform. We're talking about what we can do instead of no-knock raids, like getting them out of there and finding other ways to solve these problems in a way that results in fewer people hurt, because you're never going to have a perfect system. There's never going to be a situation where nobody gets hurt, things go wrong. We all know that.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about the broader conversation about police reform, it just seems like nobody really wants to do anything about it. Like, I know in Kentucky, they actually passed a law against no-knock raids after Breonna Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
And that was good, but it just seems like a lot of these municipalities just want to pay lip service. And then even at the federal level, which I'm leery about having the federal government involved, at the same time, you can argue that these no-knock raids are a violation of the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment. And in that case, yeah, the federal government does need to get involved.
Sure.
Rand Paul introduced a bill shortly after Breonna Taylor that would have gotten rid of no-knock raids, and it was allowed to die. And now we're having this conversation again. What do you think it's going to take, Todd? I mean, because it seems like regardless of what your political affiliation is, even conservatives, like most of my following are conservatives, and most of them agree with you and I about no-knock raids.
Mm-hmm.
But nothing is getting done. So what do you think it's going to take? Is it going to take more people dying, or I mean, what do you how do you see this playing out?
I just had this conversation. It's interesting yesterday with one of my most trusted friendships, I think, within law enforcement. It's a guy I went to the academy with. He's a major now for the Indiana State Police, and we were talking about, he was like, we only have 25 people in this next recruit school, 25 people, and from a pool of 100 applicants. When he and I applied, we competed against over 2,700 people for 80 positions.
Wow.
So what we're finding ourselves in a weird place, right? We're still, even in 2022, this is a different country depending on the color of your skin still. And that's something we have to accept, right? It's a different country for white people than it is black people, and from brown people to yellow people, all across the board. It's different depending on the color of your skin and where you live. So it's going to take the government at the highest level. That's where change has to happen. Because here's what's happening in the police, and this is why I referenced the conversation with my major buddy. Government, top-level government, knows the position that the police are in right now, that there are not enough of them. They are not trained to the capacity they should be. They're asked to plug their finger into the hole in the dam, and it's being constantly shot with a Gatling gun. There's that many holes, and then you got 4 guys out there just trying to plug holes. So they can never keep up with their workload. Therefore, they don't care about, if I can't solve this murder in the first 72 hours. That, by the way, that's the only reason the 72-hour rule applies. When people say most murders don't get solved if they don't get solved in the first 72 hours, it's because usually most murders are being worked by big departments, and they got to go on to the next case in 72 hours. It has nothing to do with staleness issues or whatever. It's just literally that's the truth from behind the curtain. It's because that detective's going to have to move on to the next murder, and he's not going to be able to work this.
Yeah, it's not a low-hanging fruit, one that can be solved easily. Well, yeah, we got to move on.
Exactly.
Wow.
In big cities, those are the murders that get solved. The easy ones. So anyway, my point is, change has to come at that top government level where they finally have to recognize, hey, yep, sorry, America, we fucked a certain demographic a long time ago where we set up these socioeconomically oppressed situations in certain areas of the community where we just expected people that didn't look like us would live, and we would never have to worry about their lack of opportunity. Well, that lack of opportunity and options for people growing up there caused some bad shit to happen. It caused a division racially, even after we're supposed to be more woke than ever before on racial harmony. That still exists because people are coming up differently with different opportunities available to them. And those are high violent crime areas now. When you look on a violent crime heat map, it's always in those traditionally socioeconomically oppressed neighborhoods. And they were designed to be hoods or whatever they were called then. So they have to admit that they created that. And then they have to fix that. They have to spend money. They need more policing in that area. They need to create more community programs and offer more opportunity there so that children that grow up there, their heroes aren't people who drive fancy cars who just got out of prison and are going to end up back there eventually. They need different. Yes, the environment. They need different role models. And police need to be better, which means exactly what you're saying, where white people piss me off. Right? White people with white people privilege piss me off because they don't see it the way you do. We don't see it the way black people do, where black people are. You're right. When I talk to my black friends, they're like, no, we don't want the police to go away. We need them in our areas. We want them to be better, though. We want them to be better equipped to handle things differently. We want them to be more educated. We want them trained better, which all equates to spending, not cutting budgets, right? Mm-hmm. How about we cultivate from within the neighborhoods that are being policed?
Right.
So that we have future police officers and heroes in the making coming from that area to be policed. And we give them opportunities to make sure they can get a college education and whatever things we're going to require of our higher paid, have more heavily trained police department. The federal government, if they do one thing right in law enforcement, it's that they pick, they're more educated. They are way more heavily trained than state and local law enforcement officers. And they therefore have less problems. Not that they're exempt from corruption and problems like you see it at state and local level, but it's less.
Yeah, because you don't hear about a lot of this happening with the FBI.
No.
I can say a lot of criticism about the FBI, but you don't really hear about, no-knock raids gone wrong with the FBI. Not a whole lot.
Right. And you know how hard it is to get on the FBI? It's very hard. They can go for cream of the crop or exactly what they're looking for. And that includes extensive psychological workups, which you don't get really at a state and local level. You have somebody who says they're a sociologist who gives you a written MMP test or whatever that is, where are you an agent of God? And if you check yes, you're of a concern. If you check no, then you're okay. And that's your psychological evaluation. Like you should be vetted way more heavily, but that requires more resources. That requires more money. But we're going to end up with better police officers as a result. So isn't that worth it when it comes to communities and police working together, communities getting what they deserve and what they want, and police being able to handle things in a fashion to give that community what they deserve and what they want? More money. It all costs more money.
Yeah, you're right.
But let's use it better. I mean, we spend how much? Do we need a Space Force at this point? Like how many trillions of dollars get spent on?
Yes, we do need a Space Force because that sounds cool as hell.
Let's just take 2% of the Space Force budget and let's fix this neighborhood policing issue within law enforcement.
Yeah. See, and I'm going to go a little bit more cynical than that.
Okay.
It's not just about the money. There are people who are very much invested in making sure that the things stay the way they are.
Good point. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And that's at the highest political level, especially. I mean, there are benefits to the division that they keep us, pitted against each other. That benefits them, and it benefits them to have this. I'm not going to say this well because I'm trying to be careful. Like I think big government's evil, traditionally speaking. I mean. Yeah. When you think back to, I'm 50 years old, so I can remember the day when black people in South Central LA were screaming, the CIA brought crack to our neighborhoods. They're ruining our neighborhoods. And people were, white people were like, oh, calm down. What are you, they're ridiculous. They're being ridiculous. And then 2 decades later, the CIA comes out and says, hey, yeah, sorry about that. They were right. We actually did do that. Yep. And we devalued all your property and we turned that area into what it is now.
Whoops.
Sorry. But we have friends who are going to come in and buy up all the property real cheap, and you're no longer going to be able to live there, and they're going to make it real fancy and charge a lot of money, and everybody's going to get rich on this end. So it's okay, right? No, you evil sons of bitches.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. But yeah, I think that's a good place to end it for right now. But like, we're gonna have to have a lot more conversations. And since I think you're the very first law enforcement person that I've ever interviewed, so now you are my official law enforcement go-to guy. So like, yes,
well, I'm
sure I'll have others, but yeah, like I really can appreciate that you are a veteran of law enforcement, but that you do have the viewpoints that you do, but because. Not only do you have these views, but they're informed by also what you experienced. So it is a good perspective to have. So I want to have more of these conversations. So hopefully you'll be able to come back on.
Yeah, anytime you want me, just hit me up. I mean, bottom line is I'm a fan of people. I love people. I don't care where you come from or what you're about. I love people, and things need to get better for us as a whole. So that's my point of view.
Yeah. So before we sign off, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you?
Okay. Basically, toddcomedy.com. Toddcomedy.com. That's my website. Anything that I have going on with comedy or true crime podcasts or other ventures, I put right there on the main page, so it's all easy to access.
Sweet. Great. And what about your social media?
It's at Todd McComas, TODDMCCOMAS, for all platforms, at Todd McComas.
Great. Well, thanks again for coming on, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.